Black Paradox is a manga by Junji Ito, and if you don't know Junji Ito, he made, Tomie Izumaki, and it's Joshi from the future, me editing. I just wanted to say this will probably be my longest video I ever made on my channel, running around like 20 something minutes, so I'll greatly appreciate if you just leave a like on it, as well as, watch it through. And I'm like around 94 subscribers. I'll greatly appreciate it. Get those 6 subscribers, get 100, man. 100, can you believe that? I can't, but thanks. But Black Paradox is about these 4 individuals, right? Taburo, Piitan, Baracchi, and Maruso. Sorry if I'm butchering these names, but they all meet up from this website called Black Paradox to off themselves. So they're driving in this car to go into their destination, and they're like, okay, why do y'all want to die? So Maruso goes first. She has anxiety about her own future, like a feeling of a series of disasters that's going to happen, and she just can't handle them. Just like this writer, that he had premonitions thinking of coming true. But then Taburo asks, hey, do you see your doppelganger just like the author? Because before he died, he saw doppelganger too, but she's like, nah, I haven't. This leads into Taburo's reason on why he wants to off himself. It's because he saw his own doppelganger and heard of a theory that if you see your doppelganger, you might die soon. So he decided to do it himself before death comes for him. So Piitan, he makes robots. He's like some scientist, and they needed someone to base this robot off of, so they chose him. But the downside of this was that this mechanical twin was superior to him in all ways, even when the office thought so too. He thought of his own existence backed into a corner. Then Baracchi reasoning is similar to everyone else about seeing a version of themselves, but her case was seeing herself in the mirror, and that person in the mirror would keep on saying die to her. So it decides to show her face, and that on her right side she has a birthmark. But while driving to a destination, Maruso looks out through the window and sees this car full of doubles of themselves besides her. Then she decides to tell everyone, hey, there's these twins, I just saw them, they just passed by, and they're like, nah, that's impossible. It's crazy how they're like, oh, we all saw our doppelgangers, and that's why we're gonna off ourselves. But when Maruso calls it out, hey, I just saw your doppelgangers, nah, you lying. Like, okay. Alright. Then Maruso was saying, yeah, I'm sure of it because I saw Baracchi clearly, but her face was opposite compared to her right now, staying next to her. And she notices as well, looking in that rearview mirror, Baracchi, who is supposed to be sitting next to her, is invisible. And she starts to think a little bit harder, like, Baracchi said her right side, but it's actually on her left side. So once arriving at the final spot, Taburo brings Maruso to the side and tells him, hey, I think something's off with Piitan, because every time he moves, I've been hearing some motors go off, and he'd think that he might not be human, but the robot version of himself that he was mentioning earlier. Then Maruso tells Taburo what she saw in the car about Baracchi being invisible. So they pull out a mirror right there, and she's still invisible, right? So they're like, okay, let's just get away from them. But Piitan and Baracchi notice and start running after them. Maruso falls down and grabs a rock and throws at Baracchi. She breaks like glass, but Piitan was able to stab Taburo, but he bursts like a balloon, so he ended up not being human either. Piitan turns to Maruso, but she decides to run, and she sees a car in the distance, and she looks inside the car, and it's the real versions that she was supposed to meet up with. This robot Piitan notices this, as well as Piitan notices that too. They're like, hey, wait a minute, what the hell? Like the Spider-Man meme. And he decides to run away from that car, so everyone's confused on what the hell's going on now. So chapter 2. So oddly enough, they decided to off themselves again. They're driving, but Maruso still has her suspicions as well as everyone else. But they're like, nah, we're the real ones. We're just trying to reassure you that we're the real ones. So they arrive at the place, and Piitan has this exhaust tube like in the first time they were trying to do it. But they're like, nah, we're not gonna do it this time like that. Let's take these pills instead. So they all get a handful of pills, and they're like, okay, 1, 2, 3, they take it. It seemed like they were able to finally off themselves, right? But to no one's surprise, because why would it be this short, Maruso wakes up and she gets up slowly. She picks up a stick and starts to tell everyone, hey, wake up, I know you're not dead. So the truth was that Taburo and Baracchi didn't take the pills because they were still having the doubt they were the real ones, other people were real or not. However, it seems that Piitan was the only guy that took the pill, and he's dying there. But now they're like, okay, let's join them. So Taburo and Baracchi agree to take the pills now, but that's interrupted by Piitan making sounds of pain, and he's coming back to life, and then he throws up this stone, but he mutters the words, full of light, it is a dazzling world. So they start discussing what just happened. So they end up saying, okay, Baracchi's to take this stone, and she's to have her friend examine it, because this stone might have something to do with the world that Piitan was describing. So now they're just waiting for the announcement of the stone. But it transitions to Baracchi's apartment. So she's looking at the stone, then she sees a world full of stones, just like the one she has right now, but drops the stone, then this aura appears appears with a face. So it turns into Maruso at work, and she sees Piitan there, and she's thinking, oh, I guess he doesn't want to die anymore because he tells the doctor about the stuff he's been throwing up lately. They lie him on the table and insert a camera through his throat to see his stomach, and it's saying it seems like everything's normal, right? Nothing out of the ordinary. Then out of nowhere, the doctor screams the pylorus. Later on that night, they meet up, and it turns out this stone is a new mineral, and it's very valuable. Baracchi and Taburo like, oh, we'll probably off ourselves after we're done being rich. So Baracchi's like, okay, I could fix my face now. But she's the only one that has morals right now, right? They're not blinded by the dollar signs. And she's like, these are Piitan's. I think we should ask him, but he doesn't mind. And he whips out a lot more. He's like, I got even more. But Piitan tells him what the doctor told him, that something's wrong with his pylorus. And Maruso explains that it connects to the stomach, to the duodenum, and it comes from the Greek word gatekeeper. Then they connect, oh, what Piitan saw earlier of the dazzling world was that he died and he was in the afterlife. Then coming back, he created some kind of doorway around his pylorus, and the stone came from that world. But this isn't a stone, but a soul, and that's what he saw earlier. So they conclude, when you die, your soul becomes this gem and joins that spirit world. But this explanation gets interrupted by Piitan. His stomach starts getting filled with stones all at once, so in a panic they try to rush him to the hospital, but he bursts. So the car is full with stones, and a bunch of souls appear. Then it turns out all these stones were later put up for sale as gemstones of a newly discovered mineral. Chapter 3. So this chapter starts off with this actor named Ray talking about this beautiful stone and that how this is a new mineral, and saying many more will be on sale soon, talking about this on his blog. 2 that were sold for high prices under the name of periodontype. So the actor Ray goes on live television to show the world this stone. Maruso is watching from home, but she's just shaking watching this. So the 3 of them meet up, Maruso, Baracchi, and Taburo. Baracchi is talking about how she was the one that gave the actor the stone, and Taburo was talking about how he stole one already to get the prices up, and they start making jokes, being all cheerful. But Maruso's like, why are you in here if we're not gonna talk about the S word, offing ourselves? Baracchi said, well, we're just wannabes, we don't want to die right now. So Maruso's thinking to herself, or out loud, I can't really tell. So he said, why are they being so cheerful? Piitan's stomach legit burst in that car last night in front of them, and these flood of stones came rushing out, those souls that came out. But once those disappeared, those 2 began collecting these stones, while Piitan was just dying there. So Baracchi asked, why'd you leave me and Taburo, and where'd you take Piitan? She's like, obviously I want to take him to a hospital, but she couldn't think of one on the spot, so she ended up taking him to where she worked at and just left him there in the emergency entrance. But Baracchi now for some reason has a problem with her leaving Piitan by himself. So now they're like, okay, so what happened to him? Well, she says she hasn't been to work in a while, so she's too scared to find out. Now Taburo's like, okay, it might be possible that the doctor saved Piitan, and Baracchi's glad, but for the wrong reason. She's like, oh, finally we could get to his stomach to get more of these stones. Maruso's still the only one that has morals. She said, well, you grabbed a lot, aren't you? You're not satisfied with that? And she's like, nah, if we're gonna go mainstream on a global scale, we're gonna need more. We need you to tell us where Piitan's at. Maruso refusing and just leaving them. But Maruso also wants to know what happened, so she calls the hospital and asks if a seriously injured patient came into the emergency room with like a ruptured stomach on the 29th. But the nurse said, nah, no one came like that on that day or any other day. So it turns into Baracchi and Taburo at the spot where Piitan exploded. They're trying to find more stones, but not having any luck. And Baracchi called all the hospitals to the same outcome as Maruso. They couldn't find anything. So now they're thinking, Maruso's lying. But suddenly Baracchi screams and finds the body of Piitan. But Taburo is quick to point out that, hey, this stomach isn't split. So it's probably the robot. The battery just died. But now for some reason they bring that robot Piitan with them to Baracchi's apartment. And this man comes by to say that he sent the sample to a mineral association, right? So he asked Baracchi, do you have any more? And she's like, I'll just leave it to imagination. He's like, okay, that's good, because I think you should hold off for a bit, because that association isn't happy of you selling some before getting the approval. But this guy tells him about like some business idea he has of like, hey, okay, these stones are too big. How about we put them in smaller pieces so we can put them in jewelry and they'll shine more brightly and the price will go up from it. But the only problem is that this stone is harder than diamond. Taburo and Baracchi are by themselves, and Taburo wants to test this fact. So he brings out a hammer and strikes it, and this big flash of light comes out, and these souls start flying around the room. Souls flying through everyone in that room. The room looks like it's stained, but Baracchi wakes up, and she said that she's seen like past lives of other people, probably because the souls went through them, but through different eras. So Taburo and Baracchi find the stone, but it's not as bright as before. Probably the energy just got drained from it. right? But out of nowhere, the door creeps open and Piitan's peeking out and saying the words of hurry and die. We'll die together. And he starts to run towards him, but he stumbles and gets a glimpse of the stone and grabs it. He's like entranced by it. But Taburo and Baracchi looking at him, his batteries are probably charged from the souls flying around. So it transitions to that famous actor Ray. He's saying that all the success that he has was because of this stone, but he doesn't want to keep it all for himself, so he wants to share this stone, but it's harder than diamond, so it's gonna be tough. So this guy pulls out a gun at this talk show or whatever it is, like the stage studio. I can only imagine the security, right? They're like, okay, there's this guys that have a gun for some reason, right? They didn't have no pat downs or nothing there. That seems pretty dangerous. But he shoots it. Then it shows an outside view of the building on fire, and the caption saying, "A famous TV station melts down and collapses inward due to enormous bursts of energy. The center of this implosion was thought to be Studio A, and that they're recording a variety show in the studio. Given that there's no survivors, there was no one who can give an account of what happened there." Chapter 4. An explosion occurred at the jewelry store, but it doesn't look like the first time. They're probably referring to the film studio, but the news thinks that this might be some terrorist attacks. It transitions to Baracchi finally decided to remove her birthmark, but this is interrupted by a wave of patients that came from the explosion earlier. Baracchi sees a burnt victim and later tells Taburo. He says, "It sounds like a serious version of the burns that we got at your place." But he asks the question, how are burns connected though? Baracchi thinks that the periodontyte might have caused the explosions because that famous actor that she gave the periodontyte to was the first instance of this happening. The next, a jeweler, and also the other night when they hit the stone and they found out it releases energy. So the harder you hit it, the more explosive energy will come out. The energy was able to charge Piitan's batteries. Now, Baracchi gets a phone call saying that the police are on their way to see her and that they came to the conclusion that the stone was the cause of the explosions. And they want to talk about the possibility of this being a terrorist weapon. The guy on the phone urges her to tell him the truth, where she got the stones at, and they'll likely confiscate the stones. Baracchi tells Taburo, "We need to tell the truth, but who will believe that these stones came from Piitan's stomach?" And he says all we can do now is run. He gets stopped by Piitan's robot. Then it transitions to Maruso at a coffee shop with the doctor from work, Dr. Suga, and he shows some concern to Maruso and saying that lately the hospital has been busy due to the explosions, but it's calming down now. Maruso said that she's just been overwhelmed with anxiety and feels that she can't carry on her duties at work. But out of nowhere, Suga says, "You thought about dying," and he could tell that just by looking at her. Then asked for her to go to a cabin in the woods for a perfect place to rest. Kind of weird, not gonna lie. It's kind of like a horror trope that you're like, nah, you're not supposed to go to the cabin in the middle of nowhere. But I'm not Maruso. This is a scary story. Who cares? Then the radio goes off in a parked car outside the coffee shop, saying that they're looking after the two people who put the periodontyte on the magnet, and they're witnesses for these explosions. Baracchi thinks that Maruso know where Piitan is, and that is the proof of their innocence. So this next scene, Suga rizzed up Maruso. Baracchi's watching from the window like a creep, and Piitan's in the trunk of the car. But later on that night, Maruso's anxiety has gotten worse, and she runs out through the house calling doctor, then finds a door that leads to the basement. Once opening, she sees a periodontyte. The doctor appears out of nowhere and says, "Yes, these are." And he says one night during the hospital, he saw a parked car in the emergency entrance. It looked suspicious, and he opens it up, and there was a body just laying there with the stomach ripped open. But all these beautiful stones were there. But what really got his attention though was the pylorus. Every now and then it would open, and he saw a dazzling world, and he asked Maruso, who was that man that she brought to the hospital, because he saw her run away, but she claims she doesn't know nothing. Baracchi and Taburo are freezing around some campfire, and she starts complaining about her birthmark being itchy, then screams and says it's throbbing. Stones begin to fall out. Maruso asked the doctor if he saved Piitan. He said he did. He's right behind her. He said his brain was already dead, but he cultivated his stomach while the cells were alive, and he said the stones stopped coming out, probably because they're not near the entrance of the other world. Maruso's in shock seeing Piitan's stomach and says, "Why would you do this? It's obvious we couldn't lose the doorway to the dazzling world." But this is interrupted by a ring at the door. While the doctor's thinking who it could be, Maruso runs for the front door calling for help. But once opening the door, she sees Baracchi. Baracchi pushes her to the side and calls out to the doctor to hurry and cut this birthmark off of her and do the transplant. Something's wrong with it. Stones begin to pour out of her face. Maruso Maruso faints, seeing. But once she wakes up, she's handcuffed to a bed and Baracchi's face is all bandaged up, saying her birthmark surgery was done a while ago. The doctor said the operation was difficult, but once he cut off the birthmark, the stones stopped coming out of Baracchi's face, but instead continued to fall out of the birthmark, and that the doorway was in the birthmark. But the doctor thinks it's strange. First Piitan, now Baracchi. It seems like there's something going on here. A month has passed and they're taking off the bandage off Baracchi. Taburo says, well, we got our proof. How long do we have to stay here? Doctor says, just be patient. But while in the basement, Baracchi's birthmark is again cultivated by an enormous petri dish. Maruso is still handcuffed to the bed and saying, what on earth are they trying to do here? This is madness. Chapter 5. Maruso is panicking about the future, saying something's terrifying is going to happen. I can sense it. Meanwhile, the doctor, Taburo, and Baracchi are in the basement. They brought this guy go into Piitan's stomach for money to report what he sees. They give him a suit and send him down. The hired man sees a hole in the other world and decides to go inside. Meanwhile, above the stomach, the doctor feels a pull on the rope and notices the hired man stop moving. They rush to pull him out. The rope has some skin hanging off like some cheese, but once fully pulled out, his body is unrecognizable. The doctor is trying to explain what may have happened. It could be the atmosphere is different from ours. The only reason he sent the guy in because all the cameras that he sent in before broke. But sacrifices are inevitable. But he did rush this. He should have reached out to some institutions for them to build a drone. Taburo says, why institutions? The doctor responds, well, we need to mobilize the power of a nation to go into the other world called the spirit world, because those stones possess lots of energy. He is convinced that this resource is the future of Japan. Taburo understands, and he realized, oh, he got a robot. So they get Piitan from the car and they brought him to the basement. Convinced him to go through this stomach, there will be a door and goes to the other side where he can finally die. He agrees, but thinking that they'll all go through the door together, Piitan swims all the way through till the rope reaches its limit. They pull him out and ask him what he see. He says that full of light, a dazzling world. The next panel zooms out and shows him holding many stones and releases them all and says, I flew around the dazzling world and picked up as many beautiful stones. But after that day, Piitan, he will go back and forth between the dazzling world and this world. And Shuga, the doctor, called him World Flyer number 1. The doctor tells Piitan it's weird that all these other devices I've sent in were smashed, but you weren't. But Piitan says, well, it's my stomach, of course. The conversation gets interrupted by Baracchi saying that she needed a checkup. During this interaction, though, the doctor's risen her up. He's planning on inviting some engineers and VIPs to the cottage and wants her to make an appearance. He kisses her and she says, what about Maruso? Didn't you love her? But he's like, well, she suffers mentally, and what I did to her, confine her like that, I wouldn't do that for a person I love. You're the only one I love. Taburo decided to leave to get Maruso. Maybe he can find the keys and they could both go out and tell the world about the doctor's evil deeds he's been doing here. He opens the door and sees Maruso in a bad state, saying that she's terrified of what's going to happen to you and me, and I can sense it. Taburo confused. Maruso says something terrifying is going to happen to you, and he starts to walk out of the room. And he gets into a car and drives, but he sees his doppelganger walking. The doctor and Baracchi go see Maruso and tells her that her and the doctor are in love and they're going to get married. But Maruso tells Baracchi that terrifying things are going to happen to her and herself. Baracchi laughs it off, but the doctor tells her he wants to show her something in the basement, and he takes her to the room where he cultivated her birthmark and tells her that the other gate is valuable. Baracchi said that she knew he would do something like this, and the doctor tells her that he asked Piitan the other day he should go through this, but he refused, saying that you should be the one to go through. The next day, all the VIPs and representatives of the country show up to the cottage. The doctor introduces Piitan and Baracchi, then plans to show the results. They all watch while Piitan enters the stomach and come back with large amounts of periodontitis. Later, next is Baracchi. She has promised to come back. In a moment, she jumps into her cultivated birthmark. Some of the onlookers saw the glimpse of the other world. Some of the guests are worried, but she's taking quite a while. But then suddenly a hand reaches out of the hole and grabs everyone's attention. Baracchi's face is melting off and cracking. She crawls out. Everyone's in horror. Then suddenly her head explodes, revealing all the wires, the chips, and bolts. Final chapter. So it starts with Baracchi and Shuga, that doctor. They're laying in bed, both laughing. The invitation meeting was a disaster, and then she exploded at the wrong moment. She wondered why she even ordered that robot from the university that made Piitan. Shuga asked, what if you dove into the gate instead? Baracchi said, you can't be serious. I'm just flesh and blood. I'm not like that robot Piitan. Shuga sneaks off to Maruso's room when Baracchi's asleep. He tries to speak with her, but she is overcome with anxiety. Shuga then says that periodontitis is a revolutionary source and will likely become the salvation to humanity. but the 2 gates that they have aren't enough, and he suspects that Maruso and Taburo to have gates as well. Shuga would like to examine Maruso at the hospital. Then he says, "I love you, Maruso," but Baracchi was watching from the door. In a rage, Baracchi goes to the basement where her birthmark is and is ready to light it on fire. She says, "How dare you make me look like a fool?" Shuga runs towards her and shoves her in the hole. Transitions to Maruso being examined. The doctor explains that there's a large tumor in the center of the brainstem. Shuga thinks that the tumor might be another gate to the other world and lies and says that Baracchi dove to the gate for the sake of humanity and that she hasn't returned, and this may be a blow for the development of the periodontyte. However, it turns out that Shuga was able to have a space agency team make a special probe that would be able to withstand the harsh environments of paradise. But while this machine is down there, the arms are not responding. Then a black spot is flying towards the camera. It shows a glimpse of Baracchi, but they're unable to follow the object. They pull out the drone, but all of it's destroyed due to the paradise atmosphere. This drone was made with everything that science can offer. Sounds are coming from the hole. Then boom, pops out Baracchi, and she hands Shuga the periodontyte. Now she's Spirit World Flyer number 2. Then it transitions to Shuga going to Taburo's house. The man who's taking care of his stuff says that Taburo thinks another him is after him. But after a while, he started to fear his own shadow and began to stay in his room in the dark and began saying incomprehensible things. Also, says that his shadow glows in the dark. Taburo not responding to any knock, Shuga enters the room. He calls out for Taburo, but he is stopped in his place when he spots a shining shadow. It's like a silhouette of Taburo. Looking inside the shadow, he sees paradise and Taburo walking closer and closer. Once stepping out, Shuga invites him to the cottage. Next, back at the college, Maruso's surgery was a success. She's calmer than usual, probably due to the part of the brain that deals with anxiety may have been affected by the surgery. Shuga tries to ask Maruso a question, but he is stopped mid-sentence by her saying, "It wouldn't happen to be that you're cultivating my tumor in the basement." Everyone in the room stunned. It seemed that she might have seen the future. Shuga leads her to the basement. Maruso seems to know what he's going to say next, talking about how he wants her to go to paradise for the sake of humanity. Shuga is surprised by this, how she's not afraid, and it seems that the surgery may have affected her emotions. Maruso dives in soon after. The world had periodontyte fever, not because it's beauty, but the explosive energy and the supernatural phenomenon that caused the sensation. But most of the periodontyte disappeared from the market and has been under government control, and the woman and man who was under suspicion of terrorism, their identities were erased. But the strange rumor persisted that in the base of the mountains there are 4 people known as Black Paradox that are bringing periodontyte from the spirit world to this one. Then it transitions to 4 of them: Maruso, Taburo, Baracchi, and Piitan sitting together. Taburo asked, "At least the 4 of us had gone over to the other side just like we wanted." Baracchi says, "I never dreamed that we would be able to go back and forth like this. We have come to find out that Maruso is able to see in the future now after the brain surgery. The vague, terrifying sense that she had became to something that I can see a clear vision of the future. The future that she sees is that humanity progresses thanks to the periodontyte. However, but in that shadow, she sees people disappearing one after another in this world." Maruso explains that the periodontyte that humanity is using as energy source is actually their own souls. Because of souls of living creatures always exist in the other spirit world, our bodies live and die on Earth, but our true forms are in the other world. So the periodontyte plan is basically humanity hunting their own souls. The bro says, "Well, we could change the future if we stop collecting the souls, right? So the future won't happen." Maruso reveals that it wouldn't matter, because if Shuga is successful in creating another gate, Baracchi says, "Well, hopefully humanity isn't stupid to continue using the souls." Maruso says, "Assuming if they can give up their blessings of the periodontyte, she'll leave it to our imagination if humanity goes extinct in the future. But she will tell them, if you don't want to disappear, you better find your soul." Piitan has his soul because he got his energy from what was actually his soul from that apartment, remember? So the reason why Baracchi's robot didn't work because it didn't have a soul. Baracchi and Taburo thinking it's impossible to find their stones. How can they tell which one's theirs? Maruso just tells them, "You'll feel something special from your soul." Baracchi says, "This sounds like you already got yours," but she'll leave that also to the imagination. Baracchi just wants to learn one thing though, Shuga's fate. Maruso says in the beginning he'll be praised for driving the energy revolution, but later he'll be denounced as the downfall of humanity. Then suddenly Shuga enters the room and says, "Hey everyone, you ready to get out there for the sake of humanity?" I'll say this is a very nice panel. They're all like, "Alright, let's get going. The future of humanity."